Tonight we're going to look at Europe in between World War I and World War II, and we're going to study the cultural and intellectual trends during the interwar years, as well as the European search for stability. One way in which the Europeans searched for a more stable Europe was during the Peace of Paris, with the creation of a large number of new nations in Eastern and Central Europe. These nations included Finland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Furthermore, the nations of Austria and Hungary were split into two separate states, and the nation of Romania was greatly enlarged. These states were meant to become a stabilizing influence, but instead became a destabilizing influence. Internally, many were unstable because of the principle of self-determination. Wilsonian self-determination was much more difficult in practice than it was in theory, and there were large German minorities in both Czechoslovakia and Poland. There were large Hungarian minorities in Romania, as well as Russian minorities in the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Moreover, there were territorial disputes between the states as well. The Hungarians held the greatest number of territorial grievances, where a large portion of Romania, particularly in the Transylvania region, was inhabited by mainly ethnic minorities of Hungarians. That would be the region, parts of the region just circled. In addition to the instability in Eastern Europe, Western Europe was not much more stable. The French feared the rise of a new Germany and did all in her power to prevent a powerful Germany and to help prevent another war. The Germans also were saddled with war debts, and a final figure of approximately 132 billion marks had been established, payable in annual installments. The Germans begrudgingly accepted this and made the first payment in 1921. However, by 1922, Germany was unable to pay any further payments due to rising inflation, domestic turmoil, and a lack of revenue. The French reaction to this, along with Belgium, was to occupy the Ruhr Valley, the area shown on the map in red. This area was rich in resources and industry, and the French and Belgians figured they would collect payment by operating and using the Ruhr factories and mines. The German workers were expected to do the work. However, the German government instead encouraged a policy of passive resistance. The problem with this policy was that the workers were not getting paid, and so in order to pay the workers, the German government printed more money, leading to the great hyperinflation crisis of 1923. In 1919, the approximate value of $1 US in German marks was 4 marks. Inflation was already pretty steep, and by 1920 that number was 50 marks for $1 US. Continued to go up through the beginning of 1923, and on January 1st, 1923, 9,000 marks were worth $1 US. During the period of the Ruhr occupations in the summer and fall of 1923, the hyperinflation that occurred made that value 4 trillion marks to $1 US. While many think this would decimate the upper class still had property and valuable goods such as jewels to cash in. The lower class were still poor, but many middle-class Germans lost their life savings, and it was this that led to numerous uprisings in 1923, including an event called the Beer Hall Putsch, which we'll talk about later on. Ultimately, the US and Britain pressured France to withdraw and agree to a new conference that helped to pursue a more conciliatory approach. And this After the Ruhr Crisis, we're going to see a period of optimism in Europe and a time of hope, generally known as the spirit of Locarno. After the pressure from France and from the United States and Britain, the United States is going to help Germany with the reparations by introducing the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan reduced reparations and helped to stabilize Germany's payments based on their ability to pay. It also granted an initial loan for German recovery, which opened the door to heavy American investment in Germany, which helped to create a period of prosperity. German Chancellor Gustav Stresemann also fostered a spirit of international cooperation and a new spirit of diplomacy as he inaugurated the Locarno Treaties. These treaties with France and Belgium displayed German acceptance of the western frontiers. Although there were arbitration treaties with Poland and Czechoslovakia, Germany did not guarantee those borders and they were not set. But this treaty itself led to this new enthusiasm in Europe that peace was finally here. The following year, Germany was admitted to the League of Nations and basically accepted her role in the world. And following that, Germans participated in a disarmament conference of 1927. Further evidence of the fact that Europeans wanted to avoid war was with the announcement and the signing of the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Sponsored by the United States and France, the Kellogg-Briand Pact renounced war as an instrument of national policy. Yet most nations were not really willing to cut back on their armaments, and I think of the Kellogg-Briand Pact as the most insignificant treaty ever created. Although over 60 nations signed it, it did nothing to prevent the next World War when it broke out. One last thing that also contributed to this better era was the recognition of the Bolshevik government in the Soviet Union. Many European nations had refused to recognize this government, and with the acceptance of the Bolsheviks, the Soviet Union could also take part in some European affairs. However, they were still considered a pariah nation by many during this time period because of their communism. Many historians date 1929 as the year that ended the hopeful period in European relations. The stock market crash in the United States triggered a worldwide Great Depression that increased in severity throughout the 1930s. By 1932, Germany suffered an unemployment rate of approximately 45%. Some industrial cities in Germany had unemployment rates higher than 65%. The United States suffered unemployment at approximately 30%, and most other countries were affected as well. The only major country not affected by the Great Depression was the Soviet Union, which was going through its industrialization process during this time period, a concept to be discussed later. The U.S. response to the Great Depression was to enact an extremely high tariff known as the Hawley-Smoot tariff. This led to a general tariff war among the nations and further contributed to the severity of the Great Depression. Because of Germany's link to the United States, Germany was unable to pay her war debts, and Britain and France were unable to pay theirs to the United States, resulting in a repudiation of all war debts during this time period. However, keep in mind, during the Depression, we are going to see the growth of both right-wing and left-wing parties throughout Europe. In Germany proper, we'll see the growth of the Nazi Party as well as the growth of the Communist Party. I'd like for you to take a few minutes and look up the following prompt. Explain why a new era of disillusionment existed between the wars in regards to philosophy, literature, and the arts, using evidence to support your point. Take about 5 minutes for each and be prepared to discuss later. Now that you've completed this activity, I would just like to show you some of the examples of art. One of my favorite examples is the Cubist movement, or also known as abstract expressionism, and one of my favorite painters is Pablo Picasso. Arguably Picasso's most famous work is the painting of. Some background about Guernica. In 1936, a civil war broke out in Spain between government forces and a group known as the Nationalists, Spanish fascists led by General Francisco Franco. Italy and Germany gave aid to the fascists, and they fought this war against the Spanish Republican government. Germany also tested many of its weapons during the Spanish Civil War, and they razed the city of Guernica during the war. Picasso wrote this in protest and displayed it at the Paris Exposition or World's Fair in 1937, hoping to get aid for the Republican government of Spain. Unfortunately, he did not get aid, but it's been a testament to the trials of the Spaniards during this time period. It is believed that the torch represents liberty, and that the horse, or dying horse, represents the dying people of Spain. Regardless, we will see a group of intellectual international people get involved in the Spanish Civil War that will help. People such as Ernest Hemingway and George Orwell went and fought on the side of the government. Unfortunately, government forces collapsed by 1939, and a fascist dictatorship was established in Spain, which would continue through the 1970s. Another example of this art during this period is the movement known as the Dada movement. Dada itself is an art movement that really reflects the absurdities that Europeans faced. One of the reasons for this disenchantment with society was that prior to World War I, Europeans felt that their civilization was superior to most any other on Earth. In fact, during the age of imperialism, they felt it was their duty to spread their civilization, this white man's burden, throughout the world. However, World War I made Europeans step back and look at themselves. The death of over 11 million people, some in many cruel ways during the war, had Europeans doubting, and we're going to see this age of anxiety set in. And in many ways, the absurdity, this supposedly superior civilization, unable to keep from imploding within itself. The Dada movement reflects this. Dadaism began actually during the middle of World War I in 1916 in Switzerland, when a Romanian intellectual named Tristan Tzara organized and wrote a manifest against manifestos. A similar revolt against conventional art occurred simultaneously in New York City and in Paris, and this whole movement, Dadaists will frequently use artistic and literary methods that were deliberately incomprehensible. Dada art ranged from physical attacks on traditional art, such as the picture you see above, and Dada poetry was deliberately nonsense as well. This movement also movement known as Surrealism, exemplified by the works of Salvador Dali. The Surrealist movement itself emphasizes the unconscious. Once again, you see the influence of Freud, the importance of dreams, and the psychological aspect in arts. And Surrealism becomes an important movement as well.